Hello there. Today we are going to be reviewing the blacksmithing in the game A Plague Tale. First off, this guy is really going to town hammering away on this cold horseshoe, but he's holding it with his bare hands. The vibrations from each blow are going to be uncomfortable if not painful. If he does this long term, he's going to end up with bone problems in his hands and tendon problems in his left arm. Moving on, the anvil is in the wrong place. It's much too close to this low wall. You want to be able to move all around the anvil to access it from multiple sides and angles. A better place for the anvil would be somewhere like here in the center of the room. This would also help the anvil stay out of the weather. The position of the anvil means that he's not going to be able to accept help from an assistant. The presence of sledgehammers among the tools at the forge implies that he is equipped for an assistant. Taking a look at the forge, the model is actually pretty good. Nice big chimney to aid draw. There's two problems, one minor, the other major. First, there's no ash dump, the space underneath the forge being used to store firewood. This isn't a deal breaker. You can have a forge without an ash dump, it just means you can't use it for as many hours a day. The big problem is that there's no bellows. This fire is simply not going to be hot enough to get to ideal working temperature. This is a doubly bizarre omission, as elsewhere in the same level we find a bellows object. They had the same model in the same level, why can't they just place it here? A hand bellows wouldn't be ideal, but it would do the job. Let's take a look at the tools around the forge. The sledgehammer on the right is pretty good. The one on the left is much too big for its short handle. I quite like this other shelf of hammers. It's a good assortment of real-life weird blacksmithing hammers. On the shelf above the sledgehammers are 3 tools for maintaining the fire. Half of blacksmithing is rearranging things in the fire to get the appropriate heat, so this is a nice inclusion. There's a poker, a fork, and a shovel, all of which are useful tools. Realistically though, all 3 of these should be black with forge scale. Another notable omission are tongs. Tongs are an absolutely essential tool for handling hot objects. They aren't difficult to make, and a lot of blacksmiths have got a collection of tongs that they made for one specific job and then never used again. This guy should have at least twice as many tongs as he does hammers. There's a quenching bucket, which is good, but it doesn't have any water, which I'm going to assume is a technical limitation rather than an oversight. The grinding wheel is another good inclusion, but it's in an awkward place. He's going to have to bring that out every time he wants to use it. The final point I want to bring up is that this forge appears to be wood-fired. This is suboptimal. Coal or charcoal are much better, but it's not wrong. What you have to do with a wood-fired forge is place the wood on the outside of the fire so that it will turn to charcoal by the time you're ready to push it in. It's a bit of a hassle, but it works fine. Final point, this guy shouldn't leave his hammers so close to the fire. Overall, I'd give this smithy 3 out of 5 stars. You could make it pretty good with some minor alterations. This forge, from much later in the game, uses more or less the same assets, but they've just changed the layout. The anvil should be a little bit closer to the fire, but this is pretty good. 4 out of 5, they're just missing the bellows and the tongs. Moving on, we're going to take a look at another smithy from later in the game. First off, we're going to take a look at the anvil. It's fairly well modeled, it's just missing a hardy hole. A nice touch is that the anvil is French pattern rather than the English pattern, which is more typical of pop culture. The anvil's in a much better place than in the previous one, but this smithy is much more exposed. This forge uses most of the same tool models. We can see the same hammer racks, sledgehammers, fire pokers. The hearth is different and of a much worse design. The shallowness of the forge is going to make it difficult to work longer pieces. You're not going to be able to heat it up further than a foot from the tip of the piece. We compare this to the other forge, which allows you to lay longer pieces on an angle across the fire. This forge is less good than the other one. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. This is the final smithy we're going to look at today. Firstly, this is a different and worse anvil. The horn isn't round enough. Looking at the forge, the fire pot is a little bit too big. This would be inefficient and difficult to maintain. The forge itself is a good shape though. If the hearth were wider and the fire pot smaller, this would be pretty good. There is, however, a pair of tongs and a set of bellows. Neither of these are the right type, but it's a step in the right direction. Off to the side we have a portable forge with a very nice set of blacksmith bellows. This is a very nice model and almost perfect. The only issue is that the arm should be angled so that it's not directly above the fire. Unfortunately though, the ceiling is leaking, which means that this stuff is all going to rust fairly quickly from the humidity. So I'm going to give this smithy 3 out of 5. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this interesting.